Thanks so much. It's great to be here on this gorgeous day. It was surprisingly warm in Chicago, which was unusual. Unfortunately, we didn't have any delays getting down here. So without further ado, I'll try and move forward with this. Much of this is a talk that I gave at the American Medical Association House of Delegates meeting, but I've updated it with a little bit more important details regarding some of the shenanigans going on at the ABIM. Briefly, a bit about my story. I guess I'm board certified. I do all that kind of good stuff, and I'm one of those unique people that was board certified thinking I was going to be board certified for life, and then the rules changed mid-game. And over the years, as I kept taking tests and saw this change occur, I was puzzled why it happened, and then by the time I'd done it for the third time, I became furious. I couldn't believe the amount of time I was asked to survey my own patients, or I had to do a quality assurance project on my own practice. And I work in a huge hospital organization. Unlike many of you who may be independent physicians, you know, I'm an employed doctor. I work with a big hospital. They're doing quality assurance stuff all the time because they have to do it. And it was, frankly, very stressful just to figure out what I had to do and how do I do it. And then the rules were all crazy on the website. So I had, health caught up with me. I had a little knee surgery, and I've never had a month off before. And so I decided to pull all their tax forms. And boy, it was quite revealing. ABIM started with a philosophy of excellence, and that was something that we did voluntarily, and that was when we all had individual practices. We were trying to compete against other groups, show people that we were smarter than the next guy. And it really was a source of pride. I remember my first time I got boarded, I was really very proud that I'd accomplished this thing. And the questions were pretty hard, and you had to really study what you were doing to pass. Since that time, very conveniently, it's now become a mark of adequacy for many of us. And so we have to do it just to be able to practice, which is a very huge philosophic change for this endeavor. And of course, the only people that have to do it are the young guys. The old guys get grandfathered in, so right away there's age discrimination with the process. Defining physician excellence is kind of interesting. Most of us would think it's years of experience, seeing lots of cases, having encountered things before, actually looking at the patient, being knowledgeable, and always learning, always trying to kind of bounce things off your colleagues, being empathic with your patient. But the ABIM thinks, no, it's a lot better just to sit behind a computer, memorize like the Encyclopedia Britannica, and see if you can regurgitate it back on a test for them. And oh, by the way, let's have you pay about $23,000, both direct and indirect costs, to our organization in either your time, 90% of which is your time that you're losing money, or with their very high fees. And I was double board, actually triple board certified, but because I grandfathered into medicine, if I didn't pass my cardiology boards, I couldn't be a cardiac electrophysiologist, and that's what I primarily do. So I was caught in this double jeopardy situation, which was horrible and didn't make any sense, and made it 5 times more stressful because I had to learn twice as much information to be able to pass my boards and practice what I do every day. And then I had to sign this legal contract that said they can do research on me, that they can, I can't disclose anything about any of the tests with anybody. In other words, violating rights to free speech about what's gone on, because guess what? They reuse all these questions. They have a database, and they have a program that randomly kind of selects questions, and they decide if they're representative of the questions that they want to have. And then they mysteriously set the pass rate cutoff, which I've been investigating for quite a while too, so I won't get into all that because I just don't have the time. But suffice it to say that they're the ones who make the rules and get to decide who's going to pass and fail. And the average failure rate on a recertification exam, I went back and looked at all of their published data. For all specialties, it's 13.2%. So more than 1 in 10 doctors will fail their recertification exam, which is incredibly psychologically stressful. and hurts a lot of people and their patients. The cost, of course, has been published. This is in a peer-reviewed journal and has been vetted, and it's exorbitant. Okay, $23,000 for the average internist is a hell of a lot of money. You also have the cumulative costs to the whole healthcare system of $5.7 billion. And most importantly for all of us, it's the 32.7 million physician hours spent each year doing maintenance of certification. There's absolutely no proof, either in independent studies or by the ABIM's own studies. Both of these were published in JAMA that showed any benefit to the quality or safety of patient care. And so the question is, why are we doing this unnecessary? Well, it becomes quite obvious when you realize the money involved. I always love when you look at the money and where it all goes. You know, you start looking at this, and about 44% of the money that they make comes from recertification, and the other part of it comes from the initial certification. And if you look at the revenues and the expenses, there always seems to be kind of this negative trend where there's more expenses out than there's money coming in. And that's been chronically like that since at least the 1990 era. It really started happening in, they've always had kind of a negative cash flow. Right now the ABIM is $50 million in debt on paper. And part of that is they funneled $76 million of our diplomat testing fees to their newly created and secretly created foundation in 1989. And I'll go over more of that in just a moment. But what's even more interesting, though, is I just pulled this page up, and now that number of expenses and revenue has grown on both sides, but still expenses are stripping the income that they're making. So we're finding that there's real problems going on here. And as I mentioned, the foundation seems to have all the money, but ABIM itself is over $50 million in debt. The bylaws were also changed in the past, and most of us don't go pulling up bylaws, but I had plenty of time, so I pulled the Form 1023s that you get, and you can actually see, and actually these bylaws were included with the tax forms. You just had to go back far enough to find them. And you can see that they basically wrote in that they can have any conflict of interest they want for any member. And then when was the foundation created? Well, this is the original ABIM Foundation webpage that always commented on it. It was formed in 1999. And it was that way for years and years and years. It always says, well, we started it, and I looked at the balance in 1999, and the damn thing had $54 million. And I said, well, where the heck did that come from? And it was very surprising to have a foundation suddenly bloom with $54 million. And I called up Richard Barron, and I said, Richard Barron, sir, where did this place get the money? And how come, you've got all this money in the foundation in 1999? And he said, why was it even formed? Well, it was to create the definition of medical professionalism, which is a weird reason to have a foundation. Most of us consider ourselves professionals. Why do you have to define what medical professionalism is? Didn't make sense. And so when I went back and actually looked at when the ABIM Foundation was created, thanks to the efforts of a canary that came in my window by the name of Charles Kroll, who'll be speaking shortly after me, that wonderful gentleman showed me how to find all these cool things. And sure enough, the foundation was created in 1989, not in 1999. And with some other additional work, I found that it was actually called the American Board of Internal Medicine Foundation, fully spelled out. And in 1999, they changed the name to ABIM Foundation and asked the IRS to delete all of the records for the American Board of Internal Medicine Foundation, which leaves it very hard to figure out where the money went. But I happened to find some earlier tax forms from 1997, and it was clear that they were making transfers from the ABIM to the foundation. And then after confronting them, they finally changed their webpage on the foundation to admit that it was created in 1989 after funneling $55 million of physician testing fees from the ABIM to the foundation. I was trying to figure out, well, why are all these fees going to the ABIM Foundation? And here's one of the grants. They just sent it over piecemeal, and this is 1 year's disclosure. And it says basically funding for various, research projects. And I'm trying to figure out, okay, now what kind of research projects are these guys doing? And actually, when you look at it and you sign up, I encountered this web page. They said, please fill out all this information so that we can do new research on how to improve healthcare in America. I didn't have any informed consent. I don't know what the protocol is. I'm like, okay, was this ever vetted by any review board? And in fact, you know, when you look at the Belmont report from the Department of Health and Human Services about what these people are doing, this is in violation of just about every statute in human research that exists. There's no respect for persons, there's no beneficence, there's absolutely no justice in what they're doing on this research on us. We're all research subjects for some social justice initiative. And I think we have to be very understanding that that's what's going on here. So basically, in summary then, it was all of this fund transfer was culminated, we found out, with in December of 2007, the ABIM decided to purchase themselves a $2.3 million luxury condominium, complete with a chauffeur-driven Mercedes S-Class town car for themselves. Christine Casella, who was president and CEO at that time, had another residence in Arizona and managed to have her husband's spousal travel fees included in her contract, and they were paid by the diplomats of the ABIM for all 11 years of her service there in that capacity. When this came up by Charles Cutler's work in Pennsylvania, when he had a debate with Richard Barron, at the end of that debate he mentioned that, oh boy, we're going, and that was in 2014, I believe. Rich Barron said, oh yeah, we're going to put that condo up for sale. And at that point, we then see that they decided to transfer their money instead to the Cayman Islands. $6.5 million in 2014 went to the Caymans, and I believe it's going to be for a legal fund or for their retirement fund, one way or the other. Anyway, so we see the social engineering things, but I wonder if they were really doing it for investment research instead. These are actual pictures from the website of the condo. And this is the most luxurious condominium renovation that occurred in downtown Philadelphia that they purchased. And it was on the 11th floor with a nice view overlooking the city. And so they get in trouble, they go ahead and transfer some money in 2014, and then of course it's sold at a 30% loss, all of which costs us diplomats quite a bit of money. So what happens to the experienced physicians who fail a test? Well, that's never been studied. No one's done any psychological evaluation of a physician who has failed. And when I confronted both Dr. Richard Barron and Lois Nora from the ABMS about this question, they just were numb. They had nothing to say. And what happens to the patients that those doctors treat when that physician can no longer practice? They're absolutely mute on the subject. There are numerous corporate and government conflicts of interest that occur with this organization, many of which I write about on my blog. And then, of course, the more important part is how much money are they making on selling our recertification data. And this is something people don't realize, is that the American Board of Medical Specialties, which owns the MOC trademark, also has a secret organization, which actually they do publish on their blog, called the abmssolutions.com. It is a for-profit company based out, registered in Georgia, uses the same office address as the ABMS. And so our money is actually, our certification data is being sold to insurers and hospital systems across the country. That's why they want to do this program. It has nothing to do with value for the patient or the physician. The conflicts of interest, as I mentioned, are huge. Richard Barron came from the National Committee of Quality Assurance, which is formed at this almost the identical time as the ABIM Foundation. Those two organizations were created about the same time. The NCQA was formed in 1990. ABIM Foundation was formed in 1989. Both Richard Barron served early terms in the National Committee of Quality Assurance before moving to the National Quality Forum. He was then recruited from the National Quality Forum to head the ABIM after Chris Cassell left the ABIM earning over $8.9 million in revenues during her tenure there. All of those are on our nickel. And then all of these things, they managed to kind of create a little kickback scheme to get doctors involved in MOC by having the taxpayer money. CMS actually subsidized our payments for Medicare if we participated in MOC for a few years, from 2012 to 2014. So all of a sudden now we can see that there's actually potential for Stark law violations potentially here. Although I'm not a lawyer, I'll leave that up to Andrew to take a peek at. But certainly the Department of Justice may want to see how much money the taxpayers had to pay to support this program. ABIM also funnels lots of grants to their friendly co-conspirators of the American College of Physicians, many university systems here for their Choosing Wisely campaign. And they wrote off $3.3 million for the Institute of Clinical Evaluation, which used to do the EKG training. They were thinking about training different skills, and they just kind of erased that money that we lost as well. They've also been doing illegal lobbying, and these are actual tax records that shows that the ABIM wrote that they're not lobbying Congress on two different, they put no line item for funds for lobbying whatsoever on their taxes. When in fact, when you go to Open Secrets, the American Board of Internal Medicine has been lobbying for many years, from 2009 through 2014, in direct violation of 501(c) statutes for a nonprofit. So these people are not running a nonprofit, or they should not be considered a nonprofit, and yet they still work, and the IRS has yet to investigate them for reasons that are unclear to me. And then there's the worst of all. When you start digging, you find, and this was one of the most disturbing things that I found, because I broke the story on my blog, and I actually thought it would be dangerous to do so. This is a gentleman by the name of Ariel Benjamin Manis. He's probably not a guy most people know, because you can't find him anywhere on the ABIM website. You can't find him anywhere on the any of the Form 990s, but he is the Director of Investigations since 2008 for the ABIM and is currently enrolled in that position. This gentleman has access to all of your names, addresses, emails, Social Security numbers, NPI, Medicare numbers, the whole works. He's got everything that you've ever entered on the computer on you, and he is a two-time convicted felon who was involved. He was a DC cop who got kicked off the force in 2003 for going after a journalist who was writing about dirty DC cops. He had his buddies target that journalist and ticket him and do other things, and was caught and kicked off the DC police force. He then went to the Railroad Division of the TSA shortly after the 9/11 crisis, started working for them, and to supplement his income, worked as a bouncer at a nightclub in DC. He then assaulted a gentleman in line at that nightclub, pulled a weapon, declared that he was a DC cop, but after the police arrived and interviewed the witnesses, he was then arrested for impersonating a police officer, assaulting the gentleman, and for carrying an unregistered firearm. He plea bargained his way out of the assault charge, but still carries both felony convictions for impersonating a police officer and for carrying an unregistered firearm. The gentleman was then involved hired in 2008 after he lost his appeal on those felony convictions by the ABIM, and was instrumental in coordinating the investigation of a board review course run by Dr. Rajendra Arora who asked students to tell him the questions that he could get the content, and the ABIM became infuriated because they realized that this gentleman was kind of usurping their secret sauce of reusing questions again and again, and he was teaching to the questions. And they've considered that to be copyright infringement. They felt so strongly about this, they took their person who was in charge of the test content, sent her to the ABIM or to this review course, and she secretly tape recorded the review course where 500 residents were in attendance, many of whom were sent by their medical schools because that was a accredited program at the time by the ACGME. And he actually had pretty good results. And so unfortunately what happened is that tape recording went before a federal judge with Mr. Manis, who then issued a writ to seize under seal, and then they raided or Dr. Aurora's home and took his computers and then searched the ABIM then searched those computer files for emails and then went back and traced all of the doctors who had emailed Dr. Aurora questions or questions about his course, whatever, and then went ahead and sanctioned 134 physicians and sued 5 of them, in addition to the sanction. Not a single trial of those suits that were filed ever resulted in payment by the physicians for damages. They were all dismissed, but not after lengthy court battles. And many of these people who were sanctioned, however, had to pay fees in order to reinstate their board certification. I have on my blog a record of a $5,000 check, and I know others have paid as much as $15,000 to reinstate their board after this endeavor. So many people had to pay a lot of money to the ABIM for what might have been illegal search and seizure tactics by the ABIM in the first place. Note that no law enforcement agent, to my knowledge, was involved in any of the wiretapping that occurred of physicians. So there's a lot of questions of civil liberties violations that have to come up. And there's also the antitrust issues with the ABIM, and obviously this organization has been involved in the only antitrust suit against the ABIM and more importantly the American Board of Medical Specialties, the entire 24 member boards for this maintenance of certification racket. I think it's important that the internet has been very valuable at disrupting the MOC brand. It's now irrevocably damaged and corrupt. I think most physicians now know what's going on. It's no longer voluntary as it's been promoted by ABIM, and I think people can see through that. It's very divisive for our profession. We have a group of physicians now who are purely bureaucratic and not practicing and making livings off of promoting a very corrupt program for our specialty. And worst of all, there's no proof of its benefit to patients or physicians, and it may actually be harmful. But it's not just the ABIM. This is about the ACGME and the entire academic house of medicine. A lot of the reason people are reluctant to, and particularly hospitals, are reluctant to move forward with maintenance of certification is because the ACGME will not accredit a hospital as a teaching program unless they have ABMS certified physicians on their staff. And the other thing that they won't do is most insurance companies won't allow people on panels, and so therefore the hospitals are scared they're not going to get paid if they don't have ABMS certified physicians on their staff. And that's where the battles have to be fought and are still being fought, and that's where the legislation that comes up on a statewide basis is so important. There are huge financial and political ties with the foundation and George Soros and the Open Society Institute, which helped fund the Institute on Medicine and Profession, which ABIM Foundation paid quite a bit of money to support that organization. Chris Cassell sits currently as a member of the President's Council of Advisors on Science and Technology this very moment. And so you can see this goes all the way to the White House. It's also important to understand that she had deep ties to both Kaiser and Premier throughout much of her tenure. She made over $1.6 million in addition to her $8.9 million with ABIM, working 35 hours a week for the ABIM. So when you look at all this and you hear all this, you just wonder, well, how the hell did this get this far? There's obviously lack of oversight, lack of accountability, totally unelected and only self-appointed members of these boards, unlimited conflicts of interest, no term limits. Lynn Langdon, who is the Chief Operating Officer for the American Board of Internal Medicine and is not a physician, was on that, is in that capacity and worked for the ABIM for 40 years. There's financial collusion between many of the players here, and worst of all, there's a lot of practicing physician indifference about all of this going on, but I think a lot of us don't realize the depth and breadth of what's happening. So who will investigate and stop MOC? And this is like the little red hen, right? I mean, we go to Rich Barron, well, not I, said the ABIM, you know, gee, I'm sorry. And then right below that, he said, well, he invited, you know, all the accountants there, and we use an accountant firm, and boy, they couldn't find a single thing wrong. I think in a moment you'll hear what they found wrong. Many of the largest medical societies, all of which make up portions of the ACGME through the Council of Medical Subspecialty Societies, are avidly making money on teaching to the MOC examination. And then not I said the major medical journals. New England Journal has their Knowledge Plus program, makes about $600 a person who enrolls on their prep for those MOC tests. JAMA just released a few days ago, JAMA Professionalism, a whole journal dedicated to the propaganda and why we have to be more professional. And yet they have these conflicts of interest right off the bat. Not I said mainstream media. These are all the people, just a few of them, who I have contacted about this story, and none of which will run this because, quote, it's a physician problem. All you have to do, though, is look at their conflicts of interest with the insurance and pharmaceutical industries to understand why they may not want to go forward with the story. And so we're going to have to do this ourselves. And this physician problem is going to be a little battle, a little war, just like Kurt Eichenwald said. And already there's been the creation of the National Board of Physicians and Surgeons with the leadership of Paul Tierstein and many other physicians who can see through the ruse of what's going on. State medical societies are joining hands. We're seeing them outlaw basically the maintenance of certification program, and it's very important that we have an investigation with the IRS, the FTC, DOJ, Iowa Attorney General, Security and Exchange Commission, and the OIG of the Department of Health and Human Services about the research violations that have occurred. And then enact laws to prohibit use of MOC, I think, will be the way to go. And obviously, this is the Sentinel State, which is why I had to visit it. This is my first visit to Oklahoma. I'm proud to be here. But basically, to see this law be enacted is a huge help in the push toward ending this program. Kentucky also unanimously voted to bring through in their Senate Bill 17 wording, although the insurance companies didn't seem too threatened with this. But this particular one, Oklahoma, is going to be a little harder. And Michigan is, I'm not sure if they've passed this yet, but they are very close to passing their resolution that expressly forbids hospitals from denying a physician the admitting privileges on the basis of MOC, and also limiting insurers' ability from using MOC as a condition of payment. So legal fronts, lots going on, as Andy's just mentioned with the AAPS antitrust lawsuit. Now they're against another member of the ACGME. There's a class action lawsuit against the American Osteopathic Association. And every osteopath is automatically enrolled as a plaintiff in that suit against the AOA. They require, the AOA is a little different. It requires physicians to pay the dues in order to remain with their organization, to remain certified. So it's kind of funny. And then the Jamie Salas Rushford case, where he is countersuing the ABIM for at least $17 million, will put a big dent in their bottom line. And they're doing a lot of nasty tricks to try and escape the publicity around that, and I'm doing everything in my power to make sure it comes out. These are the legal fees based on Form 990s that have gone on pre and post maintenance of certification. And you can see that they're huge, that a lot of people have been fighting this battle, and the ABIM is spending an awful lot of our money. So what can you do? You can educate yourself. Most importantly, I think you can spread the word. Get your colleagues to stop paying into this, to stop participating in it. Work with your local medical executive committees to prevent and remove MOC requirement at your hospital. That's the best thing you can do right now. And make sure if they won't remove it, then add the NBPAS as an alternative board for them to allow credentialing. And finally, work with your state legislators to bring bills forward that will outlaw this program. And I just would like to thank the opportunity of everybody here to have this chance to speak. Thank you.